Okay, I'm here talking about Jyotish and stuff like spiritual wisdom and navigating Kali Yuga with Zach.
Hi.
Hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing okay today.
Yeah?
Yeah, my body doesn't hurt. I'm feeling good.
Yeah? What do you want to talk about today, Zach?
I want to talk about Venus's transit.
Okay.
Tell me about that. What's happening with Venus?
With the romantic planets of love and harmony,
Yeah.
known as Shukra, semen, shining, brilliant white in Sanskrit. Venus is passing through Aries, and it's very late in the sign of Aries right now. Traditional Jyotish lore says anytime Venus has any kind of affiliation with Mars, romantic passion tends to heat up. So Aries is a sign ruled by Mars. It's a fiery sign. So people who have Venus in Aries in their natal horoscope can be very impetuous and hot-headed when it comes to romance. Those are Romeo and Juliet kind of people. Those are, galloping on the white stallion through the night to find my beloved because I must see her or him right now kind of people. It's late in Aries, so it's in the nakshatra of Bharani, which it is the planetary ruler of. Bharani's symbol is a womb or a vulva, and it's a three-pointed triangular star, which gives it an affinity with Kali Ma, the fierce Hindu goddess of destruction too. This is doubly felt both because the symbol is a downward-pointing triangle, which is the yantra for Kali Ma, and because the deity of Bharani is Lord Yama, the ruler of death. So Bharani has this restaurant swinging door. You know, the door swings both ways between the kitchen and the dining room. Bharani has that quality to it of both birth and death. And, as they say, every birth is a death, every death is a birth. So it's tied both to... it's tied to all themes having to do with going through that doorway and going through those kinds of transformations. It's also a nakshatra of restraint, both because Yama has a noose to bind people and drag them out of samsara, and because the womb, you're confined in the womb. So people who have planets placed in Bharani natally often are confined in some way for long periods of time. They're dependent on a larger structure that may feel frustrating and confining, the way the baby is held tight in the womb. And then the baby suddenly appears. I mean, you can see the bump, but essentially the baby is invisible until it suddenly appears as this full-grown baby, full-grown newborn. So Bharani people can be like that too, in the sense that there can be this period of sequestering and restraint and unseenness followed by like that person came out of nowhere and they're fully grown and developed and suddenly here on whatever scene they're on. So Venus moves at about the rate of 1 degree per day, as does it's a little bit slower than the sun, but a little bit more than 1 degree per day on average. It's nearly 26 degrees of Aries now. So in 4 days, it will go into Taurus, which is its own sign. And in 1 day, in fact, probably even later today, it will go into the nakshatra Kritika, which people often only look at the transit of the planet through the constellation, but every nakshatra and even every pada, every 3 degrees and 20 minutes of a nakshatra start to impart a different flavor to something if you want to get into it in a lot of detail. Taurus is also, the Aries Taurus, even Gemini, there's you don't really hit a terrible spot for Venus in the zodiac, I would say, although Venus and the moon are friends. So Cancer, Venus is in the sign of an enemy. But I would say that you don't hit a terrible spot in the zodiac until Mercury's first sign. Mercury's second sign, Virgo, where Venus is debilitated. But throughout roughly the next month, after 4 days from now, Venus will be in Taurus. For 10 days it'll be there with the sun, and then it will be there by itself. It will be opposite Jupiter and Scorpio that whole time. Now, this is an interesting thing. Both Jupiter and Venus are guru planets. Jupiter is the guru of the devatas, of all the sattvic, sweet, divine beings of light. Venus is the guru to the asuras, all this sort of selfish, demonic rakshasas of the universe. Although some rakshasas are very learned on average, they're somewhat problematic. But you can interpret this in different ways. It's not to cast Venus in a negative light. He didn't choose his disciples, although we may be casting Venus's disciples in a generally negative light. But these two planets, although they're both guru planets, their motivations and energies are so different. This often can set up a certain degree of tension for people who have Venus-Jupiter context, mutual context, like a mutual opposition or a conjunction in their horoscope, because there's the high-minded idealism of Jupiter is now blended with the more kind of practical Venus. We could also say in a highlight, Venus is about bringing aspects of divinity into embodied life, or working with divinity in embodied life. It's the planet of Tantra. Venus is the only being who has the Sanjivini Vidya, the power to bring beings back to life once dead. And so Venus is associated, with tantra, with magic, with tantric occult powers, with sexuality, with using sexuality to obtain immortality, essentially. Whereas Jupiter is much more associated with philosophy and Brahmanical traditions and celibacy and idealism and purity and really following the moral order of the day. The more Jupiterian you are in Kali Yuga, the more you will suffer, because the age is so incredibly non-ideal that all of that idealism will be, it's a non-stop bumpy ride down the track of life as the disappointing realization of the current level of corruption on the planet smacks you again and again in the face while you try to continue to do the right thing and nobody else does. So, except in very select circles where, there is a very strong commitment to everybody trying to do the right thing, you trying to do the right thing is like you alone in a world of people completely willing to take advantage of that tendency in your nature.
A question, so would that be more of some, moral ignorance? You want to go against the grain, but be moral and just and, idealistic, but, to your own detriment, to even your life, or your livelihood, or, you don't take actions in a way that supports your being, and, then that therefore cuts off your ability to help who you can when you can, because you're not even helping yourself, because, I'm so, idealistic, I won't stoop to those levels and,
yes,
do those things that all these other, the rest of the world's doing this and making bank. Yes,
and there is very much that a truly Jupiterian person can run themselves straight into the ground, clinging to idealism. This is true in many domains of life. So whatever Jupiter affects in the horoscope, it will appear most strongly. So people who are most, and Jupiter will act most strongly in some state, if it's in its own sign, Sagittarius or Pisces, or exalted in Cancer. So we could say, let's take the horoscope of Lord Rama, for instance. So Lord Rama had exalted Jupiter in his Cancer ascendant. Now, Jupiter is a mutual friend of the Lugna Lord Moon, but it rules the 9th house of Dharma, which is the highest of the Dharma houses. It also rules the 6th house of enemies. And so, in one sense, we could say that goodness was Rama's enemy. Goodness, the sheer nature of his goodness, is what, in some sense, caused his life to be so problematic. Starting with the fact that, when his stepmother, petitioned the king to have him exiled in the forest, that because of the Dharma of the era dictated that he follow his father's wishes, he did it without question. And then, when his wife was stolen, he fought a war to get her back without question, as the planet Jupiter himself did, because his wife was stolen by the planet the Moon, which Jupiter has a warlike aspect. Then but then when his constituents, when his subjects suggested that his wife, whom he dearly loved more than anything else, was now unfit to be his wife because she'd been sullied by Lord Ravana, there are different versions to how this story ends, but the general consensus is he exiled her because his dharma as king dictated that he make his subjects happy before he make himself happy. So in that sense, you want to say?
Well, now I'm curious because my first question about Venus. Where's Venus doing in his chart?
That is a very good question. Let me see if I can bring to mind Lord Rama's Venus. I believe it's in the 11th house in Taurus with Mercury. So, but his Venus, or was his Venus exalted? His Venus is, I believe, exalted in the 9th house.
Okay.
Venus.
In Pisces?
Yes. It's either in Taurus or in Pisces, but if I remember the horse, now that I think about it a little more, I'm pretty sure it's in Pisces.
Okay.
So that exalted Venus is aspected by that exalted Jupiter. And those two planets are they're just not friends. And and that gets into more complicated horoscope dynamics too, because Saturn was exalted in the 4th house, which Saturn in the 4th house creates all kinds of pain and suffering around home and family of origin and ancestry, etc., etc. So Rama certainly lived through a lot of that. But it also, this Saturn rules the 7th house of marriage.
Yeah.
But its dispositor when it's exalted is Venus. So if you sort of trace a chain here, Saturn is then in the sign of Venus. Venus is in the 9th house, aspected by Jupiter. So because Ravana introduced a lot of that suffering, and both partner and warfare come in the 7th house in Jyotish. Warfare also comes in the 7th house. In the 1st and 7th Lord in Jyotish are never more than neutral to each other. There's no system, there's no place when those two houses are planets that are great friends or anything like that. 6 are neutral and 6 are enemies. And so which tells you something about how difficult the nature of long-term relationship is. Is
just
it a love
general
affair? Yeah, generally. Is it a love affair or a war? But back to Jupiter and idealism. Yeah.
So now tell me about what's happening now with Venus. So you're saying it's.
So I'm saying for
transing
4 more
into Taurus.
Days, it's transing into Taurus, where it will be opposite Jupiter for about a month. So it will be in its own sign. So there's 2 levels to take that on. On one level, Jupiter is the biggest and heaviest planet in the zodiac, astronomically. His name is Guru. He's twice as heavy as all the other planets put together.
Gaurava.
Yes. And he blocks incoming space objects, like from hitting the Earth. So this is just a sort of astronomical mirror of Jupiter's ability to protect from harm. So on one level, whatever Jupiter aspects in a horoscope to some degree is protected from harm. That's one way that works out. Now, but Jupiter can be more or less benefic depending on what your rising sign is in Jyotish. So on the one hand, Jupiter sitting in Scorpio there is, for people running Venus periods or influenced by Venus for some reason, on the one hand, Jupiter is kind of casting a protective spell over Venus. Now, will that be noticed in a short-term transit for a month? Perhaps, those who get into car accidents, a meaning of Venus's vehicles, those who for some bizarre reason get into car accidents next month, may feel they were delivered by divine grace. That's Jupiter. Jupiter is divine grace. So it may be like, wow, it may be that kind of thing. Like, now Venus is in Taurus, so let's say you're slated to get in a car accident next month. I rolled the car right into a farmer's field, but,
I wasn't hurt.
the farmer had a pet elephant. Jupiter rules elephants, and was able to take me back to town to get help on the back of the elephant. That kind of thing, But or the experience of like, oh, I nearly died in a car accident, but then an angel showed up, and and that kind of thing. Jupiter gives that kind of divine grace to in a certain sense, but it also creates dilemmas around. So people may get romantic opportunities because Venus is in Taurus, but then feel that the person doesn't measure up quite in some way. Because Jupiter's idealism will be at work there. Jupiter, right at the moment, is very late in the sign of Scorpio. It's right on the marker star Ophiuchus, which is the great dragon, which is the marker star that leads to the black hole at the center of the galaxy. Jupiter's been hanging out at the end of Scorpio for a long time, and
it's retrograde right now.
Yeah, and he's been there for a long time. I think it's just been recently that they finally made a photograph of the first black hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but having Jupiter here, I don't know. There's I think a feeling in the world, and there's other astrological reasons for it too. And we live in Kali Yuga anyway, so can we say that this sort of feeling that wisdom is being sucked down a black hole right now is any greater than it usually is? I don't know. What would you say to that, Zach?
Well, there's a lot of. I mean, maybe I'm watching too much political media about what's currently going on, but in regards to current events, there seems to be a lot of at least the perception of what was considered conventional wisdom is being eradicated, and that which got us here in the first place in terms of like the last 4 presidents, all of their deeds are being questioned or brought into question, and a lot of that work is being undone. Whether it's for good or better or worse, it's yet to be determined, and we probably won't determine that for the next 8 years. But a lot of what we thought to be so is not necessarily so anymore. And there's a lot of corruption that's coming to light that I think there's still yet to be an evolution of, or like we're currently witnessing the events of what's to come. The special counsel Robert Mueller just resigned and reiterated like, I'm not going to testify, read the report, Barr was accurate, and walked off after, spending 10 and a half minutes just looking down and reading a piece of paper that he wrote.
Wow.
Wow.
So yes, so wisdom maybe being, or something, goodness maybe being sucked down a black hole at an accelerated rate right now, we might say.
Maybe. And even, I think it was yesterday that there's now, because of the immigration crisis, Trump has now created he put a tariff on all things from Mexico of 5%, increasing by 5% for the next 5 months until Mexico takes some sort of action themselves to halt the immigration. Because there was just an event but I think it was like 1,056 individuals in a caravan together crossed the border at El Paso into the country. And now there's migrants who are because they're overwhelmed, they don't have enough space for them at the border, they're now being flown to different cities and like places in Florida and like Democratic and Spanish speaking locations that they can then be processed and go to their hearings for and be determined whether they're fit to stay or have to go back. So I mean, that's to me that's unprecedented, but the numbers of people crossing right now is unprecedented. There's never been so many people who have, like, it's just been steadily going up, and last month I think was the highest month on record ever, and it's still going up. So yeah, it's really interesting. And then I watched a video. It was this guy who used to be a Mexican police officer who had accounted for a lot of these caravans. It's a lot of different gang members. He was saying directly, like, because he worked and lived there as an officer. A lot of gang members are coming through and attempting to get out of their country, and he may or may not have helped in Tijuana make Tijuana Great Again hats. But that's much a funny joke. Check the YouTube video. But yeah, what I thought was so is not so, or is not appearing to be so.
Right.
Which is in some ways reassuring because, like, you know, it was an unfortunate matter that was occurring in terms of, you know, a lot of like the corporate corruption that's now coming to light. You know, so there's some good and some bad coming out of this. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like having to dig up the septic tank. Like, we're gonna install a new one, but right now there's shit everywhere.
Yeah, are we going to install a new one? This is an interesting question because, you know, there is. Think how pressured you have to be to try and come over the border to this country. It's a phenomenal undertaking, I think. I mean, that's. It's not exactly a lighthearted endeavor, you know?
Yeah, I mean, people are starving, children are dying.
Yeah, like there's desperation behind such a move.
And it's such a mixed bag because there are people who are actually in need, who are coming through, and then there are people who are abusing the system and, like, you know, bringing other people's children that they kidnapped in order to get in, claiming, oh, this is my child, we need asylum, and then ditching the kid and then going off and doing whatever. Yeah,
well, that's true everywhere. That, you know, this is that is Kali Yuga, and corruption happens everywhere. Corruption happens just, you know, I mean, not to everyone. So I think that's a yes. Wisdom is being sucked out of a black hole. Ah! Yeah. Let's hope. This is an interesting point too in terms of thinking about numerology. It's 2019 and Ophiuchus is the marker star. The place where Jupiter is sitting is the marker star for the 19th nakshatra Mula. And Mula is ruled over by Niriti, who's the goddess of calamity, the goddess that in Vedic sacrifice they beg her not to appear and mess things up. And so this nakshatra is associated with calamity of all kinds, and I keep wondering if the numerology of the year vis-a-vis the nakshatras is also playing in, because as far as I can tell, and again, you know, reality, is it subjective, is it objective? Was it always this way and I personally just noticed, or are things actually worse? You know, it's like it seems to me that there is some kind of rampant acceleration of negativity. And change in entropic systems is not linear. It's well, in any system, change is not linear anyway. But under the influence of entropy, you often talk about a tipping point when it, you know, you reach a tipping point, and then all these things that were in development suddenly come cascading down at once, and so so I'm sort of feeling like this year is a tipping point for the whole planet in some sense, or we've reached a tipping point and it's tipped over, and there seems to be the cascade of negativity that's been building in the works for a long time, and that's now just showing up more and more in everyone's face. And that's an interesting question vis-a-vis what people should focus on in terms of Jyotish, I think, because there are the traditional aims of human life, you know, work, love, relationship, home, spirituality, education, children, and all those things, you know, take on different meanings under without social stability. Without social stability, what those things start coming to mean is radically different. And so, as a Jyotishi, when I think, what should people focus on in times of great duress, vis-a-vis, you know, is there a special branch of crisis Jyotish that I need to develop?
I don't know. I mean, what came to mind is, like, you know, in terms of like locational astrology or like relocation, where's a safe place to be on the planet?
Is there a safe place to be on the planet?
Well, yeah, is the planet a safe place to be?
Yes.
These are all wonderful questions, but in the grander scheme, it's just my selfish, individual, human survival instinct. Like, where do I go? Oh no.
Yeah, right. No, everyone wants to know. I mean, and that again with locational astrology, we can look at where people have planetary lines that are better or worse for them, and say. But Jyotish always operates according to time, place, and circumstance. What your individual karma is always going to occur within the nexus of bigger cosmic events, bigger planetary events, your own culture, etc. It's according to time, place, and circumstance. So this is also an interesting thing, because as more human beings are born, we're now up to 7.5 billion people. In theory, as the sort of resource thing gets more and more misaligned, what you can get for your Jyotish chart may also be less and less. I read this article this morning. A lot of Syrian refugees are going to Brazil, and he was able to start a food cart that's so popular it's going to be entered in some Olympic food cart competition in Brazil. And he arrived in Sao Paulo with nothing, and he was harassed by the local police, but then the mayor put him under his protection. And I'm thinking that's a kind of phenomenal yoga. This is one refugee out of, what are there now, 65 million, 85 million refugees around the planet, and he's getting FaceTime for capitalistic success on the internet. That's like, wow, I wanted to see his horoscope. There's a power yoga there, because this is someone, this is someone, and again, okay, having a food truck even that great? I don't know, but it's a lot better than being amongst the 1 million Rohingya refugees who recently had to relocate out of the refugee camp to avoid the massive storm, in the Bay of Bengal. But that's the point, is that Jyotish always operates relative to time, place, and circumstance,
I guess the question that comes to mind is, how does one determine whether their own assessment of time, place, and circumstances is accurate or appropriate in the first place? Because one person, I could be delusional and think the sky is falling, and think that, every chart I saw, like, you're screwed, and, like, just give nothing but bad results. Or I could be overly idealistic and be like, oh, nothing's wrong with the climate or the way things are, and everything's just peachy, and don't worry, go ahead and buy that house, and, do the et cetera, and so on. So how, I guess, what comes to mind is, like, having outside communication or someone else to confirm who's, like, on the same level in terms of your capacity. But, I wonder, how does one accurately assess, this is the circumstance, and this is, from the chart, like, what will pass, and so on and so forth.
Yes, right, yeah. How do you weigh the background of what's going on against the individual karmas in a horoscope, especially in a world that is very rapidly changing, that is a really, really good question, and is there a reliable method for doing so? Well, generally, some understanding of what is taking place in the world can help you. Mostly, people going through a refugee crisis are not going to call you for a Jewish reading. Should I walk north to the United States of America is not a question you're going to get, maybe ever, maybe too often, simply because, although someone somewhere may, odd things occur. So knowledge of the world, I mean, knowledge of the time, place, and circumstance of the clients that you're working with is definitely essential to be able to gauge these things. And then, this is a really good question because, for instance, all of the farmers that just got flooded in Nebraska. Let's say that your Jyotishical specialty was farmers of Nebraska. Would you have been able to see destruction in every single one of those people's coming in every single one of those people's fourth houses of homes? This is an interesting question, to be sure.
In the case of a farmer, are you looking at the home because the home is also the farm?
Yes. Or,
because, it crossed my mind, like, well, could it also be business, like their 10th house being screwed up too? I mean, if it's something like in the 4th, it's aspect of the 10th, or vice versa.
Well, we would expect farmers generally to have something where the strength of the 4th house outweighs the 10th, and while the 10th house is nominally the house of career, truthfully, Jyotish is a fractal, and so the career any house in the horoscope can indicate career, truthfully. The 10th house does not. The 10th house is actually the Kurukshetra, the battlefield of life, and it is where we, in theory, commit most of our actions, because it's the 10th house is when the sun is directly overhead, high noon. It's daytime. It's the angular houses 1, 4, 7, 10 are the houses of action. So the 10th house is the highest house of action and the most indicative of action. But it is nominally, but this is where Jyotish gets overly simplified, because the 10th house may not indicate your career at all. Oftentimes, the most influential planet in the horoscope will indicate the career, which is the one that influences the most factors, including the Lagna Lord, the moon, and the sun, and or the one that is the strongest. And you also have to look at the samskaras of a person, what their mental impressions are, what drives them, what their interests are. Yeah. So, most people who work in the healing professions have a very strong 6th house, for instance, because it's the house of health or ill health. So then that becomes the house of career, so to speak.
I definitely find it, when you're talking about healers, like the people I know, they tend to have either witnessed or they themselves gone through some degree of trauma or severe illness that they fought to or sought to recover from.
Yes.
And through that journey, I mean, I myself, invested so much time into yoga, Ayurveda, etc. Now it's, evolving into like, well, I know all this stuff, so why not share this?
Yep.
Is really where I'm ending up.
Yeah. Yes, your own journey brought you there. Yeah, and that's also because the 6th house is what's called an Upachaya house, which means a house of improvement, meaning that planets placed there start off bad but can improve with effort, and so unlike the Trichostanas, the 8th house and the 12th house, the other two Trichostanas where matters may start off bad and stay bad no matter what you do. The karma is so drita, you may not get, not always, but you may not see a palpable result, you may not feel a palpable result until another lifetime. So it's But the sixth house, you can often visibly improve things for both self and other. So it can be a good house for being a healer. It is, and yes, often that the wounded healer, it precisely starts. I mean, I don't think, it's like Jyotish, I don't think it's not my observation that most humans that are healthy take more, for the most part, they don't take more than a passing interest in health. That's not always true, but there's a lot of people, they don't, health is not a focus. I mean, they don't, enough of a focus to really understand healing. More than in some very rudimentary fashion.
Now, in terms of, when I think about how there's many doctors who don't necessarily promote healing, but the profession is of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the current medical system is dominated and influenced by the pharmaceutical industry, who encourages them to prescribe more drugs to get paid for more prescriptions, and then even the insurance companies who additionally encourage seeing more people as opposed to achieving greater results
mm-hmm.
with the individuals who you do see.
Mm-hmm.
And so are there any doctors who, like, it doesn't look like they have a good chart, but then, like, they become a doctor, and then, like, you see the corruption, or, like, the OBGYN who sleeps with their patient and stuff like that happens with the people?
Mm-hmm. Well, to be a doctor isn't necessarily to be a morally perfected human being by any stretch of the imagination. And
True.
One of the things that Jyotish teaches you from long study and practice is the endless permutations of human beings and their destinies, and the way people get themselves, or the way I hate to blame people, but the way people, I was going to say the way people get themselves into the mess they currently occupy. That's the whole, I mean, the ideal premise of Jyotish is that for those interested, you can hold up a mirror that allows the person to, inserts enough reflection that a person can actually get some leverage and choice over what are otherwise mostly automatic tendencies, both mental and karmic, that run. It is, and sometimes there isn't. I mean, sometimes there isn't anything people can do, but certainly, there's no problem in the karmic world of Kali Yuga with having money and power and lack of ethics. There is actually, in psychology today, there's a new disorder called hubris disorder. Modern studies, the human brain has what are called mirror neurons. So the mirror neurons pick up the state of another being when you're with them and record it. And so in some sense, you're only ever who you are in relationship because you're activated in relationship, and your brain records both who you are with a person and who that person is with you. So most everything relational about us is laid down in pairs. It's us. It's a 2-track memory in the brain, and this is why early lifetime influences, become often very key to how we interpret relating to other beings. But as people acquire more power and success, they lose mirror neurons in their brain, so their ability to empathize with other beings goes down. Success, it's like for every whatever, so much success, the mirror neurons start dying. And so there, it's called hubris disorder, but people actually literally lose the capacity to neurologically empathize with other beings, which is sign of the times.
So in that particular scenario, have they simply identified it, or is it they've identified it and understand what means to address it?
I haven't read that there is a means to address it. I think that is probably addressed over the long haul via Shani Maharaj, Lord Shani, who in the due course of time will put the hurt on you enough to remind you to duly empathize with other beings. But unfortunately, there can be a time lag of lifetimes between when Shani is the slow mover, so you can have really dug yourself a grave before the cosmos intervenes to give you a path of correction, and that path of correction that may then go on for a lot longer than you ever thought it needed to. Not to say all suffering is a product of previous bad action at all. It's not, but no. As far as I know, there's no cure other than misery for hubris disorder, which isn't usually prescribed.